This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra.
Here is another Beyond the Big Screen teaser for episodes coming soon. I hope you enjoy and definitely tune in for the full episodes. If you want to learn more, you can head over to beyondthebigscreen.com. You can support Beyond the Big Screen on Patreon and Subscribestar. By joining on Patreon and or Subscribestar, you can help keep Beyond the Big Screen going and get many great benefits. Benefits include advertisement-free content, bonus content, and early access. The bonus content is great too. I will feature outtakes from episodes and live streaming episodes. If you join at the executive producer level, you will become just that, an executive producer of Beyond the Big Screen. You will be able to develop ideas for upcoming episodes, help find great guests, and of course have your name mentioned at the beginning or end of each episode. You won't just be a supporter, you will be a critical member of the team. Go over to patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen or subscribestar.com/Beyond the Big Screen to learn more. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send me an email to my email address, steve@a2zhistorypage.com, or follow us on social media by searching for A2Z History. I will see you next time Beyond the Big Screen.
Here are some outtakes and bonus clips from episodes of Beyond the Big Screen. Today we feature American and presidential history.
We've covered, I probably really like the big issues, the silver and the tariffs. What were some of the other issues that were really boiling up at that point that were points of conflict? I know there were some issues with Native Americans, and they both had some good things on their sides, and then they both had some pretty terrible things on their side with the Native Americans. And then Hawaiian annexation, what seemed to be a issue at the time. But were there some other ones that were maybe distinctions between the two that were important issues?
Well, and I think that gets to a point of, because at this point in history, this is the late 19th century. You have the major European powers, Britain, France. You even have, new players like Germany has unified at this point. Italy has come together, starting to make their influence known across the globe. And this is the time, the height of the British Empire, the empire on whom the sun never sets. And meanwhile, you've got the U.S. And what is the U.S.'s role in this imperialist idea, in this imperialist fervor? For so long, there was an idea of isolationism, and it goes back to, they would turn to George Washington as an example of somebody who said to stay out of, foreign alliances and stay out of those foreign wars. But at this point, we've had westward expansion. We've expanded out to the Pacific Ocean, and our interests as a nation have always been further abroad than our own shores. And so you have people who have this imperialist mindset and are saying the U.S. needs to get in the game or we're going to be left behind. If we're going to ensure our security on the West Coast as well as the East Coast, we need certain things. We need a base in the middle of the Pacific. We need a canal in Central America to be able to get ships back and forth, and also, for commercial shipping. It'll really help our industries to be able to do that. And so you have people thinking beyond our borders and thinking beyond North America. And that becomes an issue for the parties, because you have people like James G. Blaine was really a proponent for having a Pan American conference, bringing together all the nations of the Americas to talk about issues, to start to build some connections, treaties, possibly alliances, who knows, just get everybody together and really start to engage in this diplomacy. But then you have Democrats, and Cleveland was against the idea of the Pan American Conference. He felt, again, very much small government. We don't need to get involved. We need to listen to Washington and stay out of these entangling alliances. But that push is growing. And in particular with commerce and industry and the money men, the barons of America are saying, we need to expand. We need to continue to expand in this new way. Now, with the previous expansion, the geographic expansion and settlement of, from the East Coast to the West, we see at this time, the late 19th century, the native peoples have suffered for generations. They have been systematically pushed to the worst land, the harshest land to be able to cultivate, to be able to survive on. They've time and again been shut down by military might, by powers and by the government. And so this is a time that there's only so much of a scope in which they can still fight. They're still fighting. And you see the end of, this is getting towards the end of what has been dubbed the Indian Wars. And really, at this point, that was the major focus of the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army was, by and large, in the West, just trying to keep the peace amongst the native peoples and make sure that they are contained. And this is, towards the end of this. And we see in Benjamin Harrison's presidency, you see the last major battle, the Battle of Wounded Knee. And so this era of what we romanticize as the Wild West is coming to an end. And what does the world look like after that? What does America look like after that? And that really comes back to, and again, this idea of, what are we doing? Are things working as they should, or should we be thinking of something else? Should we be thinking of different ways of doing things? Conditions are changing. The world is changing. The nation is changing. What does this mean? And so naturally that filters into the political climate and the political arguments of the time.
Going into that election of 1892, what was it a sense that this was strange, that there was a rematch? Because I don't believe there was a rematch to that point. And I'm trying to think to my go through my Rolodex of presidencies really quick. I don't know if there's been a rematch since then.
So there was one-ish. So the election of 1824, that was the election that had John Quincy Adams, who ultimately got elected. Even though Andrew Jackson received the popular vote. But there was also Henry Clay in the mix. There was Crawford in the mix. 1828, it was just JQA and Jackson, but it was kind of dubbed as this rematch. But yeah, it is rare that you get the same candidates going toe-to-toe again.
Where did Benjamin Harrison stand on some of these big issues, especially the tariff and gold? And where did he stand in comparison and contrast to Cleveland?
Getting into his presidency a little bit, during his presidency, the McKinley tariff was passed. But a major thing with the McKinley tariffs that isn't as discussed as much, it definitely raised the tariffs to extremely high levels. It was all about protectionism, but a component of it was reciprocity treaties. And basically these were treaties, okay, so let's talk to this nation. We have imposed this tariff on them, but if they give us what we want, maybe they let us market our goods there, in this industry. And so then we can if you agree to that, or if you agree to maybe we want to establish a military base or whatever, whatever we need, it's using economics and trade to influence foreign powers. And this is a very Jeffersonian idea. Jefferson and Madison were all about, because they felt that military endeavors, that war was just a waste. It was a waste of life. It was a waste of resources. It was a waste of money. In order to achieve the same goals, why not use our economic might? And at this point, America had much to trade with, much more so than during Jefferson and Madison's time, when they tried the Embargo Act and the Non-Importation Act, and it didn't work out so well. But the reciprocity treaties, it was like, if you give us what we want, we'll lower the tariffs and your goods can come back in and still be at a lower cost. Maybe we don't lower them completely. Maybe we don't completely eliminate them, but we give you a little more access to the market again. Now, there really wasn't that much time to put that into effect. The Harrison administration was very much gung-ho about, once this was put into place, starting to negotiate these reciprocity treaties, and they started to have some coming in. But as we'll see, the election of 1892 does not go so well for Harrison. And when Cleveland comes back in and Democrats are back in place, they change all of this. They eliminate the McKinley tariff. And so we really didn't have that much of a chance to see if this would work. But that was the basic argument. And this argument goes back to, Jefferson and Madison, that let's use economic might so that we don't have to use military might.
Was that the election with Harrison, or was that the one before that all of that dirt came out?
So that was the one that he was against Blaine. It was the first time that Cleveland ran, and the cry was, "Ma, where's my pa?" And Democrats would answer back, "Gone to the White House, ha ha ha." It was the time, but he was attacked for the scandalous having a child out of marriage. But it does seem that he did provide for the child. The mother is another story, and again, don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But yeah, when he is in his first term, he ends up marrying Frances, and so they get married, have children, but significant age difference. She well outlived him, and again, Harrison, kind of does the same thing with his deceased wife's niece. It's it is one of those things, it was seen as somewhat more acceptable. I mean, there's still criticism, but it wasn't quite as unusual or out of the ordinary as it is nowadays. So, but it is very, very interesting.
Yeah, I think both of those, the kids today might call it cringe.
Yes. Yes. I mean, it's just odd. It's an odd circumstance for both of them. You've watched these young women grow up. You saw them as kids, and okay, we're going to get married and have kids.
Yeah, there's something not right about that.
I mean, there are plenty of other women. There are plenty of other younger women if you want. Come on.
In the grand scope of things, we're talking about a good 100 years between Jefferson and now. Was that idea of Jeffersonianism, was it sort of fading out at that? Was that a major point in the Democratic Party, or was that a struggle that they were having leading into Cleveland?
I think it was, and part of it, because, looking at the historical landscape at the time. So when Cleveland was elected in 1884 and assumed office in 1885, at that point, the last Democratic president had been James Buchanan in 1861. He left office. So this was a good amount of time. This was, this was 24 years at that point that since a Democratic president had been in charge, and Democrats had successes in congressional elections. They had at times taken over, the House and things like that. But this was their first opportunity again to be in that position of power. And much had changed in that time. Much had changed in that time. And that is part of what and I think why this period of time is so important to study. You've still got these Jeffersonian ideals floating about, and arguably they're still floating about in our own day. You still have people who say that we need limited government, that we need to back away and dismantle the military industrial complex and all of this. You still have these ideals out there, but the world, Jefferson's agrarian idea of the self-sufficient farmers, and of course, folks know, Jefferson was not necessarily he wasn't necessarily out in the fields himself. He enslaved individuals, and that's how he was able to run his plantation. But he still had this ideal of the self-sufficient farmer, that you would only minimally need goods and services from merchants. And that was part of the debate between him and Hamilton. Hamilton was an urbanite. He saw the value of industry. He saw the value of banking. He saw the value of commerce, but Jefferson didn't. And by the time of the 1880s, that industry, that commerce was, by and large, America. You still had a good portion of the population that were farmers, but it was small farms. It wasn't major farms, and it certainly wasn't anything like farming is primarily in the 21st century. But by and large, it was shifting. People were moving to the cities. These factories were growing. This industry was growing, and you had the barons at the top who were doing everything they could with the wealth that they had to make sure that it would continue to grow. And that comes into play in the 1888 election, because Benjamin Harrison was seen as being the money candidate. He was the one that, the industrialists turned to. This is the guy who's going to put tariffs in place that will protect American industry, help us to gain even more money and expand even further. And so it was a very different condition. Even though you still had this ideal in the political makeup, it's hard to see how it would be viable.
I guess that's because he always was middling in most presidential polls. He's not at the bottom, but he's not at the top. Yeah. It seems like these presidential polls of historians, they seem so political in the modern politics. If you go in a certain direction, they put on to the whatever president, he was X, and so we should put him. It seems so subjective that they almost seem not useful for anything to rank people there's a 200 and some odd year spread, and so many things have changed and so much context has changed that they're fun, but to say that they're an academic exercise is foolishness.
And it really comes down to how you think politically. I've looked at a lot of these polls. It falls down on, if you think the government should be more energetic, you're going to rank those type presidents higher. If you think the government should be more limited, you're going to look at Jefferson and Cleveland and Harding and people like that. It just depends on the polling, and it just depends on who's doing. There are other polls that have Cleveland ranked pretty high. So not the major polls like the C-SPAN poll. He's not going to rank very high there. But it just depends on who's being polled. So, as you said, that they're really not very useful in that way.